Good morning. Nice to see you all here. I'd like to tell you a story about a beautiful, rare tiger named Mohini. She had been a gift from another country to a zoo in Washington, D.C. She spent years confined in her 12 by 12 foot cage, spending her days pacing back and forth, 12 feet. Walking the same figure 8 pattern hundreds of times a day. After many years, the zoo officials decided to build Mohini a large habitat, which included several acres of all kinds of trees and grassy hills and even a pond for her to play in. In this lush environment, Mohini would be able to run and play and climb and explore, right? So the day finally came when they released Mohini from her former imprisonment, her cage, and placed her in this small jungle that they had made for her so that she would be free to live like a real tiger. But when she arrived at her spacious new home, Mohini didn't respond in the way that they had expected. Instead, she immediately ran to a far corner of her new home, found a wall, and started pacing back and forth, 12 by 12 feet in a square. She paced that same 12 by 12 foot figure 8 pattern until the grass was bare. She never left this little self-imposed square. She continued that pattern until the day she died. I tell that story because, well, I'm sure you all knew where that was going. That's what we often do. The tiger is the very symbol of wildness, beauty, freedom, and power. These are also characteristics of our essential nature, if we will tap it. It's sad enough when some of this essential nature is confined or blocked into eternal cages when we are children. But it's even sadder when we let these external cages become internalized and keep on being imprisoned as adults, long after the external cage has been removed. The bars still exist in our minds. Escaping from those inner bars is what raising our consciousness means. Opening up to the myriad possibilities in our lives and getting to the point where we see our freedom and we take it. Reverend Robert Brummett calls this birthing a greater reality in his book by the same name that we've been talking about the last few times that I've been giving truth lessons. One of the ways that we can start doing this, escape our internalized cages that were imposed on us, really, as children, is to begin observing all the ways that we are influenced by our old conditioning that has reinforced itself in our lives for years and years and years. We're not even aware anymore of what we've done. Mohini the tiger was so conditioned to think that her life was restricted by a 12 by 12 foot cage, that no matter what the situation provided, she lived out her life in her self-imposed confinement. How like that we all are sometimes, just going on automatic and in ways we're not even aware of. There's little thinking about the 12 foot 12 cage that we have imposed upon ourselves, and society reinforces that. One of the ways Robert Brummett suggests that we quit living a Mohini-like confined existence is to consider the fact that we are completely identified with our human nature. Think about that. when we should be embracing our full spiritual nature, all that we can be and that we were created to be. He says that human nature, as we know it, human nature is a step in evolution, but that there is a much, much higher level in the evolution of human consciousness. He says that it's an evolutionary impulse to embrace life and who we really are, and that not to do it is cheating ourselves of ever really living. We can exist for 90 years or so, but to really live, we must embrace that higher consciousness, our spiritual selves. Developing this higher consciousness was one of the main focuses of Unity co-founders Charles and Myrtle Fillmore in all their teachings. Change your thinking, change your world. We all know that. Reverend Brummett's book is a 21st century manual about how to do this, how to birth this greater reality in our lives. Buddha's immortal words, when asked who he was, were, "I'm awake. That's who I am. I'm an awakened being." Meister Eckhart talks about the eternal birth that we all go through. The Apostle Paul speaks of dying ceaselessly, meaning dying minute by minute to who we were the minute before, dying ceaselessly. The Bible tells us many times, wake up. When the apostles slept instead of staying awake and watching for the Roman guards, it led to Jesus Christ's death. They weren't awake. Metaphysically, this meaning of the story is that our not staying awake can lead us to the death of our inner Christ consciousness. Staying awake, staying very, very present all the time, observing what's going on with us, must be a goal of anyone who wants to evolve beyond our automatic conditioned state that we all have inherited, which is placing us in a metaphorical 12 by 12 foot inner cage. Often our whole lives is what really happens. Many people never are even conscious that it's possible or that anything different from the way they live and been conditioned is a possibility in their lives. What I love about Robert Brummett's book, Birthing a Greater Reality, is that he actually gives us methods and tools to escape from this suffering, from this inner cage. And he makes it clear, as do the Buddhists, that ignorance is not bliss. Thank you, Katrina. It's self-imposed suffering. Ignorance is self-imposed suffering within a habitat of possibilities, just like the tiger mohinis. It's like the caterpillar refusing to leave the chrysalis and fly away as a butterfly. It would be like a 6-year-old refusing to leave its playpen because it's all the 6-year-old has ever known. It's like those people in Plato's cave who had spent their whole lives watching the shadows at the back of the cage and thinking that that was reality, and refusing to leave the cave and actually go out and live in the reality that had been reflected their whole lives by the shadows. The metaphors of mankind's dilemma in this respect aren't lacking. We've all read about them and heard about them, but the reality of doing it is sorely lacking. The great thinkers, writers, and spiritual teachers have left us the blueprint, but we must look at it and act on it in order to construct a life that is really worth living. Meaning that we live as our unique selves. And the starting point of this kind of awakening, as is written over the Temple of Delphi, is know thyself. In the first talk about Robert Brummett's book, I shared with you ways in which Reverend Brummett suggests actually doing this, starting to see how we are pacing through our lives like the tiger Mohini in his cage. Reverend Brummett reminds us that meditation and self-observation are the best ways to really start knowing ourselves. Just observe. When we start observing our thoughts and emotions, for example, really notice everything you're thinking, everything you're feeling, we see negativity and stress and fear and suffering that we're experiencing and that have been really kind of running our lives. We don't make certain choices because that fear comes in. And so, I won't do this. I'll just do that because it's familiar. Seeing our dilemma, then, is a starting point for letting it go. We must face the dragon in order to slay it, right? For example, last week we talked about identifying what Reverend Brummett calls our shadow self, those parts of us that we don't like and that we don't want to see and we don't certainly want others to see. We've been programmed to think these parts are bad, therefore we're bad. These human characteristics might include selfishness, bad temper, being judgmental, prejudice, lying, cheating, etc. Usually, when we can't avoid seeing those parts of ourselves, we rationalize. Maybe we cheat on our expense account at work because we rationalize that the company owes us because they've been paying too low a salary. Maybe we rationalize gossiping or getting angry because, the other person deserves it, of course. Or we lie because that other person just couldn't take the truth. The problem is that our unconscious knows that we've done something we think is bad, so it condemns us and it deems us unworthy, bad, dishonest, or mean under that persona that we're projecting out there. We then often punish ourselves in various unconscious ways by making bad choices, by allowing things to come into our lives that really aren't good for us. Reverend Brummett says that we need to get very, very present and notice when we're feeling this way and thinking this way. We must face the dragon and accept that shadow self that we are hiding from ourselves and others. We need to understand that we are just human and that this is normal for a human, and then love our whole selves unconditionally and have compassion for that part of ourselves. We then need to remember that under these human reactions to our programming, underneath it all, we are divine and perfect, and that these temporary obscurations must be lovingly looked at, understood as part of being human, and then worked with, and then we can let them go. They'll go by themselves. They'll just fall away, slowly, with great compassion and great wisdom. Reverend Brummett says that one way to see our shadow characteristics is to notice what we think of others, because we often project onto others what we don't like in ourselves. So, if we notice our negativity toward others, individuals, groups, maybe nationalities, we'll have clues about what we're rejecting in ourselves and projecting outward. Bosses, political leaders, significant others, and groups we deem other are typical outward people on whom we project our self-hatred, negativity, and judgments, that which Robert Brummett calls our shadow self. For example, if we think our boss is narcissistic, we may secretly believe that we are self-centered and that our true motivation with associating with others is for what they can do for us, what we can get out of them, maybe money, expertise, time, ego stroking, whatever. This isn't bad. This is human. It's just an immature and unevolved human. It means that we are still stuck in our 2 or 3-year-old narcissistic stage to some extent. Scott Peck, who wrote The Road Less Traveled. How many of you all read The Road Less Traveled? Scott Peck, he was in town a few years back, and he said that about serial killers. He said that they were just people who were still stuck in their 2-year-old narcissistic stage and just did whatever they wanted to. 2-year-olds are like that. They may scream all night to get out of bed. They aren't thinking about the fact that mommy and daddy are exhausted. Others' needs just aren't yet part of their consciousness. They're still immature. They have to outgrow this stage, as we all do. And some of us didn't get a chance to do that because our needs weren't met properly when we were 2 or 3. We just need to understand our mechanicalness and spiritual immaturity so that we can quit condemning and punishing ourselves and others. Just understand, oh, that's just something that's not quite mature enough yet. These parts of us aren't bad at all. We are just spiritually immature. Do we condemn a 2-year-old to prison for stealing a cookie out of the bakery when mommy takes him shopping? No. We explain that this just isn't the way we act. We don't quit loving our 2-year-old. We don't make her feel bad or like she's some damaged, helpless person unworthy of our care. Most of our shadow selves are just like that 2 or 3-year-old emotional level, because that's where we didn't get some important need met. And our growth stopped when our needs stopped being met at that stage. It's nothing for us to feel ashamed of, just understand and work with and overcome. But it's never too late to parent ourselves and grow up. And the more we love and treasure that little 2-year-old in us who stole the cookie, the more she'll give up her narcissism and get with the program. Underneath our shadow self, or that immature emotional self, is our perfect divine being that will one day leave its chrysalis and fly away as a beautiful butterfly, ready to embrace life and start experiencing a whole new reality with all parts of ourselves. That shadow self is full of possibilities and creativity and energy, and we can then work with that part of ourselves. What does that new reality look like then? First of all, there's a total evolution in consciousness. That means that we don't suffer due to the problems we encountered as we crawled around in our caterpillar form. As a butterfly, we just don't have to deal with some of the things that we formerly thought were the way it is. We fly above many of life's problems in that stage. We don't react with stress or fear or anger as much because others aren't yet mature spiritually. We just understand. Oh, okay, so noted. But we don't react to it as much. There's great freedom in that. We might use it for grist for the mill, whatever happened, and it first triggered us and made us afraid or stressed us out or negative. Use it for grist for the mill to think about what still exists in us in some way, but we quit being so triggered by all that outward stuff. We understand their and our imperfections and immaturities as just developmental stages in the continuation of life and the road that we're all traveling together. The Hindus, whose teachings go back at least 4,000 years, are pretty succinct about this growth process in a human life. They break life and our evolution of consciousness into basically 4 stages. The first is the pleasure stage. Developmentally, we pursue pleasure for years until we find out it's just not enough to make us happy. Second stage is worldly success, power, fame, maybe money. But in due time, we discover that these things really don't make us happy either. Suicides abound in Hollywood, for example. The third stage is getting to the point where we really want to be good people and help others and make a difference in life. The Hindus say that this is a very noble life stage, but that in and of itself, it doesn't satisfy that hunger, that deep hunger of the soul. The fourth stage is when we work on experiencing our very deepest desire, which is liberation, what the Hindus call mukta. This involves what we all really want, to experience and express our true nature, who we really are. The Hindus say, as do the Fillmores, that our true nature consists of pure being, infinite awareness, and true bliss, what the Hindus call Ananda. It's being our authentic selves. We aren't hiding anything. We're not afraid of anything. We're not hiding from anything in ourselves. We're authentic. We no longer look outside ourselves for pleasure or recognition. We become who we really are, unafraid of life and others, because we understand what's going on and the fact that nobody's bad. People are just in various developmental stages, spiritually and emotionally. Most of humanity never reaches that point. It's true. I'm looking out at a group of people who I think are working to reach that point, if not already there, but that's rare in life. But now there are a significant number of people, a mass of people who have and who are sharing this state with others. It's often called God consciousness, reaching that ultimate level, say in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the God consciousness stage. At that point, we are free from unhealthy desires because we see that they really don't lead to real happiness. Brummett says true happiness is being our authentic, joyful selves, free from attachments, peaceful, and expressing our divine selves constantly. At that point, we are free from outer problems because nothing out there bothers us. We note it. We don't have our heads in the sand. But it doesn't bother us. It doesn't trigger anything anymore. We can fully participate in life without hang-ups, childhood traumas, stress, negativity. We are fearless. We don't just crawl out of our chrysalis and then sit there next to it. We fly away as a butterfly. Reverend Brummett says that one of the things that prevents our freedom and causes suffering is desire, which the Buddhists say is the whole cause of our suffering. It's not so much desire or wanting things, it's our attachment to them. It's okay to have desires. New Thought great Emily Cady says that desire is God tapping us on the shoulder. The cause of our suffering, though, is our attachment to these desires. We get so attached to our desires that we are miserable if we can't manifest exactly what we want right now. And when we do manifest it, we are in constant fear of losing it. Getting free of our attachments to our desires comes when we realize, usually through meditation or prayer, exactly what these desires symbolize. maybe security, self-acceptance, or some other ego need. It's not the outer thing or person we need. It's what they represent inside of us, something we think we don't have. For example, we may think we need $1 million and we pursue it every possible way. The reality is that what that $1 million represents to us is security or a sense of self-worth, which is already inside of us. We project what we think we want or need onto another person or thing, and then we think we've got to have that person or thing. The truth is, we already do have it within ourselves. We don't have to be dependent on any person or any outward thing to meet that need. The Buddha's first noble truth is that life is suffering. What that means is that we aren't in a state of absolute peace and joy 100% of the time. That's what it means. Life is suffering. The second noble truth is that there is a cause of that suffering, and that cause is always us, our thinking. Our suffering is never anything out there. Brummett calls that delusional. Delusional thinking, or not perceiving reality as it is, but as we've been programmed to see it. The third noble truth is that there is an end to suffering. That's very optimistic and true. And that end to suffering is just change our thinking. Realizing why we are attached to a certain desire for something or someone is a perfect example. What do they represent to us? What do they symbolize? What does this thing mean to us? Not that thing or person at all. It's realizing that we're believing our programmed thoughts, just like the tiger in the zoo who kept creating a small cage to pace in despite its huge habitat. Gurdjieff once said that we're free when there is absolutely nothing between us and what's out there. There are no thoughts about it. There's no programming to interpret it. There are no lenses through which we falsely see it. It's when we realize that what's out there is what is the problem. It's what we think about what's out there that's the problem. It's not the situation or person that's the problem, but how we're interpreting that person or thing. Liberation means nirvana. Freedom from our attachment to things and people being a certain way. That's great freedom, isn't it? Nobody has to be a certain way. That's nerve-wracking to think, oh, everything's going fine right now, but then they might change. We don't have to live that way anymore because it doesn't matter. It's accepting that it is what it is and not what we think it is. So there's no reason to ever suffer from what we think is happening out there. Just look at why we're suffering. Pleasure and pain arise in the mind, and the attachment to believing them can be let go of. That's the good news. It's possible. People are doing it all over the place these days. Thus, our happiness or our suffering do not depend on the conditions, the outer conditions in life out there. They depend only on how we respond to these conditions. Reverend Brummett, the Fillmores, Buddha, and modern psychology agree that it is possible to experience unconditional happiness if we see deeply into the cause of our suffering, our delusions about what is going on out there. Our delusion about what we think is happening out there is called Maya in the East. Maya means illusions or delusions. We don't see reality. That's what it means. We see it through our conditioned, distorted lenses, and it causes us suffering. For example, the caterpillar might see its death as a caterpillar as bad. And he suffers because he doesn't realize that this process is perfectly normal and part of its natural growth into becoming a butterfly. He's attached to the way things are and suffers when the status quo changes. We're often attached to the way things are, even the way we are, but we're missing out on so much. We often suffer because we still see a dualistic universe where we're separate from others. We're separate from the whole. We think we're not a part of it. So we think there's something we don't have, and we desire it, and then we suffer when we don't have this. The truth is that we are that which we think we don't have. Thou art that. Meister Eckhart said. Jesus said, I and the Father are one. He went on to tell us that we are all one in the body of Christ. Reverend Brummett, who's a physics professor, many of you know by trade, says that quantum physics implies that what we experience as the real world out there is really a construct of our own minds. Again, our thinking creates our world, even in terms of physics. We create our world by our perceptions and our attachments to our perceptions. Brummett says that we project these perceptions from within onto an unformed energy field out there, and therefore create ourselves what appears to be the real world. I just talked to Reverend Brummett yesterday morning, and I asked him about this in particular, and he said, yeah, it's like a rainbow. It wasn't in any of his books, and I thought it was great. He said, the rainbow, we see it, we think it's real, we go up there, touch it, it doesn't exist. It's in solid form in and of itself. It's our perceptions of all these particles and this energy that make colors with our optic nerves. According to physicist Fred Alan Wolf, he says there is no reality until that reality is perceived. He says the reason for this is that no clear dividing line exists between ourselves and the reality we observe outside ourselves. That's modern physics. What we objectively perceive, then, is imbued with a perceived meaning based on our memories, programming, and consciousness. If we perceive a person as dangerous, threatening, or bad, it is all our projection. Our conclusion may or may not be accurate. That's a whole nother story. They may just remind us of some scary character in a horror film that we saw when we were 7 years old. If we're walking down the street and we see a big black dog, and we were once bitten by a big black dog, we're very likely going to project bad dog fears onto that animal, and we're going to suffer is the problem because we're afraid and we get stressed. Our peaceful walk is ruined by our internal ghosts and unhealed childhood traumas. Our sense of reality is learned. It often has little to do with who or what is there. What Reverend Brummett wants for us is to start waking up to our illusions so that we won't needlessly suffer. We'll be free. That's what freedom means. He says that the best way to heal ourselves from living in a state of Maya is to meditate. Meditation is the sword that cuts through Maya or illusion. It helps us see our thoughts and emotions for what they are, just passing cinema in our minds, no more real than the celluloid that projects motion pictures on the movie screen. That wisdom allows us to quit crying and screaming in the movie of life, because we know it's just a projection. It's just a movie. We need to view our thoughts and emotions as just passing energy. That's what it is. It's just energy going on. Just watch them like the movie that it is. We needn't react to them. Nothing about them is real. It's just stuff going through. Vipassana, known as insight meditation, is like an axe that cuts through illusion. We sit and watch our thoughts, and we don't identify with them or believe them. Famous insight meditation teacher Jack Kornfield says, "Through the profound practice of insight, we reach beneath the cells and synapses, and we free ourselves from these instinctive forces that cause us to suffer needlessly." In summary, 1, the evolution of our consciousness is the evolution of our sense of me to we. 2, we realize that our sense of humanity is just a step in our evolution. We can transcend to the next level, which is our spiritual identity, being one with God and each other. We integrate our shadow self and thereby actualize our potential as humans. We realize the shadow self, the things we don't like and hide from in ourselves, and we hide from ourselves and others, is just the immature part of us, to be outgrown and integrated, not ever shamed. 4, desire in life. Desires are normal, but our attachment to these desires create cravings that make us suffer. 5, suffering, or dukkha, as the Buddhists call it, is humankind's attempt to find satisfaction in the outer world, which can never provide it. 6, the first step to healing this suffering is to become aware that nothing outside of us can bring us true happiness. 7, we must start realizing that the world as we see it is Maya. It's illusion. It's our thinking about the world and others that makes them good or bad. Nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so, Shakespeare said. And when we make them bad, we then suffer from fear or stress or depression. 8, society's collective agreement about Maya or illusion is what gives meaning to things. We must wake up and see beyond these meanings. This is freedom. 9, a mindfulness practice, which is usually a meditation practice, is a way to see through, cut through all that Maya or illusions. It is then that we can dissolve the craving, clinging, and resistance we have to other things or people. And 10, the point of using these tools is to cut through our attachments and delusions so that we can free our true selves and be happy and authentic and peaceful beings capable of birthing a greater reality than we have ever thought was possible. Thank you.